Hi, this is Sarah from Sarah Homfray Embroidery, and today we are making another French knot video. Now, we did have one, it got corrupted, not sure what happened to that, so I thought great opportunity to make a better one. So this is the ultimate guide to the French knot. So as I said, this is the ultimate guide to the French knot, but if you just want a reminder about how to do it and just want to know about the knot only, then do check out the express version of this video. You can see that up here, and that's just explaining literally how to do the French knot. This video we're going to go much more in depth, and I've got lots of information for you about the French knot, so do hang around for that. So we're going to split this video into 5 sections. So we're going to start with the actual knot, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Then we're going to look at problem solving, so what to do when the knot goes wrong, because that can happen. So it's great for you to know how to fix it if that should happen. Then we're going to talk about how many times you wrap a French knot. Quite controversial, this one. It always comes up in conversation, so we're going to have a look at that too. Then we're going to look at some different threads and what happens when you stitch them in different threads and anything you might need to know about that. And lastly, we'll put them in some context and we'll have a look at some pieces from my collection and see what you can do with the French knot, because it's a really versatile stitch and really one that's well worth having in your stitch bank. So we'll have a look at those pieces at the end. So I'm just going to talk about my setup quickly. I've got my frame here with my design on it that I'm going to stitch on. I've got it clamped in 2 versatile table clamps, and people always ask me, what are you using for your clamps? So they're versatile table clamps. We've got a couple of videos on those, so do check that out, and they're for sale from the shop as well. Really great for holding your frame nice and still. I'm going to work on a linen fabric, and I've got a nice thick perle thread here. So this is a twisted thread, and I'm using that in a number 22 chenille needle, something nice and big so you can clearly see what I'm doing. And I'll talk about needles a little bit when we look at the other threads as well, but let's look at the actual knot. So I'm just going to show you in this circle here. I'm just putting a knot on the top out of the way, and I'll do actually my little 2 starting stitches just to hold that on the circle, because that we're going to get covered up later if I was making this into a design. So that's just to start my thread. So you just bring your needle up where you want your knot to sit. Now the thread comes towards you, the needle goes away from you, so above this thread, and all I'm going to do is take the thread over the needle, back underneath. Now you can see this tension that I've got on it here. This is really important that you keep this tension. And then I'm going to take the needle back into the fabric, not down the same hole, but just close to that first hole there. So I'm just taking the needle back in there. Now the trick with the French knot is this part here is to pull that tight around the needle before you take the needle through to the back. And then if you just pull down nice and slowly, don't yank it down because your knot will disappear. So nice and slowly to tension it. That's a French knot. Do a few more for you. So up where you want the knot to sit, thread towards you, needle above it, wrap it over the needle, back underneath. Keep this tension on, this is important. Needle goes back into the fabric near to where you came out, but not the same hole. Tighten the thread around the needle. You can actually let go of that now once it's tight. You can see the control I've got over the thread and the needle there. Just pull that through slowly and just tension that up. So I'll do another one, thread towards me, needle away, over, back, pull that up tightly, needle goes in the fabric, pull it tight around the needle before you take the needle through. Tension nice and gently to the back. That's if you're right-handed. Let's have a look at left-handed. Now, I am right-handed, not left-handed, so this might be a bit awkward for me, but I will do my best. So all I'm doing is literally mirroring what I've just done for right-handed. So the thread still comes towards me, the needle is away, the thread goes over the needle, underneath and back. Keep that tension on it there, needle in the fabric. Pull that tight now, don't forget that stage, really important. Needle goes through to the back. Tension slowly. So thread towards me, needle away, over, back, tension on the thread, needle goes in, pull it tight, needle through to the back. So that's left-handed and right-handed for you. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going back to right-handed because I am right-handed, but again just mirror this for left. So we've wrapped the thread, we've wrapped the needle once. Now we will talk about that this in a minute, but I just want to mention it briefly now. You can go again, so twice. Again, keep the tension, pull it tight around the needle, and you can just keep your finger on that if you want to, just to keep the tension on it. Pull it loose and you get a larger knot. So once, twice, keep the tension, needle goes in, pull it tight, needle through to the back. And that really is all there is to it. And I know French knots for some reason still a fear in everybody. You love them or you hate them or you think I can't do them. They're not difficult. You can see that. Just remember those two things about the tension and you'll get perfect knots every time. So it's easy watching me sit here and do it. I've done hundreds of them, but something is bound to go wrong and it's usually the same few things. So I'm just going to have a look at those now and see what to do if those things happen and how you can easily fix them, because I don't want that to put you off doing these because it's a really great stitch. So I've just swapped now to 3 strands of a stranded cotton or floss, because this is better for demonstrating what happens here. So you wrap your needle and you go back down the same hole that you came out of. Pull it tight, you pull your needle down, and if you pull on it and pull on it and pull on it, the knot disappears through to the back of the fabric. So it's gone back down the same hole that it came out of. You need to secure it by leaving yourself a couple of threads in between where you come up and where you go down, and then there's no way the knot can go through to the back. So if you have disappearing knots, that's what you're doing. You're going back down the same hole. So I'll try and do it again. Catch another thread. Yeah, I caught another. I've got a backing fabric behind this, so I've caught another thread. So I'll try and demonstrate that working again. So you wrap your needle back down the same hole, and your knot disappears. So all you need to make sure you do, wrap your needle, come down close to where you came out, but not the same hole. You can get pretty close to this. You've only got to catch a few threads of the fabric for it to not go down the back. And if you just pull it slowly, then you're not pulling it through the back. So it's about tension as well. Close by, pull that round the needle. Pull that through slowly, 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 and you can just feel when that's the right tension, because if you just pull it and you really pull hard on it, your knot will vanish anyway. So that's one of the things that can happen. The other thing that can happen, and I'm going to switch back to my thick thread for this, is if you don't pull it tight at this stage. So when I do my French knot, I've been pulling that tight there. If you don't do that, what you get is a weird kind of loopy stitch. So not pulling it tight. There we go, that's a better example. And you don't get a fully formed knot, you just get this big loop on it. So I'm not pulling that tight there, it comes through, holding it down, but then you get these weird loops. It's quite a nice stitch on its own, if you can repeat it, and if you can do it, it's a really nice stitch, but it's not a French knot, obviously. So if you don't pull this tight at this stage here, pull that tight now, that will form your knot. If you don't do that, you get these weird loopy bumpy bits. So that's the second thing to look out for when you're doing a French knot. So the third thing that can happen is you can't get your needle through the knot when you're pulling it out. So you come around into the fabric, pull that tight, and then the needle gets stuck here. And you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and it's starting to hurt your fingers and the needle won't go through. So there's a couple of reasons that this is happening. This can be really too tight. Now I've got mine on quite a tight tension there, but I find if I let it go, I'm not fighting against the needle, and then I can just wiggle that through and that pops through. So you need it a tight tension, but you need to sort of feel it, not too tight. you need to feel that tension and see what feels right. And if you really can't get the needle through that, it's too tight. If I just really pull on that now and keep that on there, it's quite hard. It's actually generally quite hard to get the needle through. So it's about taking up the tension. Take up the tension. You can see I'm sort of giving it a little tug. You can let go of that. You can take the needle through and it just pops through to the back. The other reason it could be doing that is your needle is too big. If you want to know how to find the right needle size, we do have a video all about needles. I'll put that up here for you as well, to help you choose the right needle for the right thread, because it is a massive subject that I haven't got time to go into now because we're talking about French knots. So it may be that your needle is too big and you need a smaller one. So do check that video out to see if that makes a difference for you. So just a couple more things. One thing that can happen is that they can look a little bit regular. So you've got the hang of the stitch. You think, oh, this is great, I know how to do French knots. And you're off and running. You're doing French knots till the cows come home. And then you think, oh, well, it all looks a bit regular. And you end up doing this sort of row of knots. And instead of getting something nice and textured, you can get lines and lines of knots. And that's because we're doing the same thing again and again from the same position. So I'm coming up here, I'm taking my thread over the needle and back, going down above where I came out, pulling it tight, taking it through, doing exactly the same thing. And the French knots will appear exactly the same. They'll be quite regimented. So if you want to do it differently, want it to look a little bit more organic, you'll need to do it from a different angle. So you can either turn your frame around. I can't do that because I've got it clamped at the minute, so I shall turn myself around, and I'm going to go, instead of above that, I'm going to go to the side of that. And that knot, you may not be able to see it with the odd one, but if you did lots and lots, you'll see that then they're not all uniform. Go down, and then it will look much more organic that way. Do a weird one to the right, so that when you start to fill in an area, it looks much more natural. So that's one just worth knowing. The other thing, while I'm talking about doing lots together, is if something does go wrong, if you did 5 French knots and then for some reason the 6th one, you don't do the tension, you get a loop on it. If you have to take that French knot out, you have to take them all out. You can't undo a French knot. So my little tip for that is every 2 or 3 knots, put a couple of stitches in to hold them in place. You can either do that on a design line, or you can turn your frame over, just weave it under a couple of times, and that sort of finishes the end of the thread, and then you can carry on with some more knots. And then if they do go wrong and you have to cut them out, you've only got cut a couple out and not all of them. I learnt that one the hard way. So a couple of little holding stitches between every 3 or 4, and then that will save you a lot of time later if you do need to cut any of your knots out. So the last few things in this problem solving section is people say they don't look very regular. That's just practice. Even if you follow those rules, it still takes a bit of a practice, and you can see the rhythm that I got into when I was just doing a few. So that's all just comes down to practice. If you get the technique right, the neatness will come and they will all look the same. And the other one is they can look a bit bobbly, and they can start to move. So they should be nice and secure. And they shouldn't be moving on your fabric, and they can sort of look like they're sitting on top and they can move around. That's to do with how many times you wrap your needle, and we're going to talk about that next. So this is always a topic of discussion that comes up whenever you mention a French knot. It's how many times do you wrap it? Some people say just wrap it once, some people wrap it 4 or 5 times. So which one is right? Let's get technical about this. So I'm going to wrap it once like we've been doing before, round and back. So what happens is when it goes around the needle, it makes a loop. And then when the needle goes down through the middle of that loop, this thread is holding the loop down. So you've kind of got 2 interlocking loops. So that's one wrap. So if I wrap it twice, go once, twice. Now I've got 2 loops around the needle, but I'm still only holding those 2 loops down with 1 loop. Hopefully this is making sense. It will make more sense the more times I wrap it. So let's do 3 1, 2, 3. So now 3 wraps around the needle, still only holding the 3 wraps down with 1 loop of thread. You can sort of start to see what happens now. I just pull on it from the back. Can you see that move? And I mentioned earlier in the previous section about it sort of looking a bit bobbly and they move around on the top, and this is why they do that, because you've still only got 1 thread here but 3 loops around the needle, so it starts to move on the top. So let's go for 1 more. So we'll go 4 now. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you've ever done a bullion knot, which we have a video on by the way, this is starting to look like a bullion knot now, to be honest. It's a different process, but so you've got all those wraps around the needle, and then you've got this final loop holding all of those down. You can see that was a bit harder to get the needle through. You can see what's happening now. So we've got that 1 stitch holding all those loops down, and then you can see how much that moves, and these loops are starting to move in themselves, and it's looking a bit ugly now, not looking like a French knot. Obviously I'm poking it and pulling it, and if I didn't do that it wouldn't look so bad, but I think 4 wraps now is really not a French knot anymore. I would say the same about 3. So my personal opinion on this is wrap once or twice, but anything after that, if you want a larger knot, then use a thicker thread. So you can double up your thread, or you can use a different thread altogether. We'll look at different threads in a moment. So my opinion on is it more than 2 wraps, change the thread up so that you've got the same number of wraps, thickness around the needle as you have holding it down, and then it doesn't do this weird lumpy thing here, which is just isn't a French knot anymore. So once and twice is good. 3 or 4 not. Other people might say differently. Stressing now, that's how I do it, and that's what I think. So yeah, that's my opinion on how many times to wrap a French knot. So I've been showing you French knots in a perlé thread, basically so you can clearly see what I'm doing, but you can do French knots in literally any thread, and even some that you wouldn't even think about, so we'll get on to that. So I just wanted to show you what they look like in some different threads really. So we're just going to start with some wool. So this is an Appleton's Crewel wool, so it's 2-ply wool. It's quite fine, but if you've ever used wool, and especially this one, you'll know that these little hairs can catch on things. So a French knot is quite wearing on the thread. You're going around the needle and then you're going back through the middle, so all that thread is pulling through and wearing. So you might just want to consider a larger needle for these. I do 2 wraps, it's going to pull even more as it goes back through. They can hear that. So nice short lengths for these knots, and maybe a larger needle. So I've got a Crawl 5, I think, for that. Let's go twice. I do it quickly. You can hear that pull through. You don't really want to hear that, so I'm going to go a bit slower. And you can see how small they go, so you can get some quite good details. And we did use some stranded cotton on the previous one to show you what to do when it goes wrong, and that was 3 strands, and they're really tiny. But this crewel wool as well, if you want a really small stitch, you can pull it a little bit tighter, and that's what I'm talking about, feeling your way through it. Don't just pull it and assume that that's as tight as it needs to go, but if you want a smaller knot, you can just pull it tighter, and you can get really fine details with it. So even though it's wool, you can get beautiful small knots with this. And then if you want to double it up, you can. I should just double it underneath to show you. So again, if you want a thicker knot, we just talked about, don't wrap twice, just double your thread instead. And then you're doubling every part of the knot, and just not just the bit that goes around the needle. Oops, let's go once around that. Okay, so that's wool. So let's have a look at linen. So this is a linen thread from Studio Flax. I did a video all about these threads recently. If you haven't seen that, do check that out. They're really lovely to use. So I'm going to try one of these for French knots. because I didn't actually do French knots in the project I did for that. So this is quite a thick thread now, but it's quite a coarse thread, and it can pull a little bit if you're not careful with it. So I've got a large needle. I've got a chenille number 22 for this. So let's see what size that is. So we'll do one wrap. It is beautiful to use. It's a bit deceiving. You think it's going to be, oh, let's just pull the thread up from underneath. I think it's going to be quite rough, but it isn't. It's actually quite smooth. And these ones are coming out quite large. This is just one wrap as well. Feels really satisfying, and you can see when I'm stitching how easy these come when you get the hang of it. Really lovely stitch to do. That was Ginger Cat. Have you heard that? Is he going to come and see us? You're going to come and see us, Ginger Cat. So let's just try a couple with 2 wraps. 1, 2. Nice big knots. So consider what thread you want to use for the texture you want to make. If you want something a bit more textural, use a thicker thread, wrap it a couple of times. If you want something fine to put some detail in, and I'll show you some pieces later with that in, then use a finer thread. So that's the linen. So let's have a look at some silk ribbon. Now I have got videos on silk ribbon and French knots, so there is one about this, but I just wanted to show you this in the context of other threads and using French knots with those. So I've got 3 ribbons here. I've got a 7mm, a 4mm and a 2mm. So the 2mm comes out pretty fine. I'd rather show you the thicker one because this is very just like a thick thread really. So I think we'll jump straight into the 7 actually, because you can check out that other video if you want to see how to do them in a finer one. So I'm using a chenille needle, and then to secure the ribbon you just push it through the end of the needle through the end of the ribbon, and then you just pull on that. Magic. Hello, you come to see us. Can you just sit there? Good boy. Just sat on the ribbon. Are you going to sit there? Right, so how am I going to start it? Let's start it from underneath. Hey. Wait, can you stop that please? Mind, it's not the bathroom. We're trying to film something here. Good boy. Okay, so no different to the other threads, round and back, but just don't pull this too tight. These look really lovely if you just keep your tension quite loose, and you can see I'm just pulling that down slowly. Ginger Cat's sitting on all my threads, nice and slowly. And you can decide how much you want to tighten that. So just be nice and gentle with the silk ribbon. Slowly, slowly, slowly. You can see that knot form. It's really beautiful actually. They make really lovely knots. This 7mm ribbon especially. And look how wide the ribbon is and how small the knot is, because it's very soft material. They're so nice. I'll do one with 2 wraps and see what that looks like. Now you can see the more it's going through, it's actually twisting, so you might just want to untwist that so you get the nice flat silk. Around twice, close by. Not pulling it too tightly around that needle now. Comes out really nicely. I do like the silk ribbon ones. There we go. So something a little bit different, and for the last one, something really different. So for the last one, I'm going to try something really different. So if you like gold work, you will be familiar with this. So this is a smooth pearl, and this is a metal coil. There's no thread in this at all, it's just metal, but a very fine metal coil, and I'm going to try some French knots in this. Now this is quite difficult, it's extra difficult under the camera, so I'll do my best. There might be a few takes of this one. So what I've done is I've cut myself a few short lengths. Now this is about 1 centimetre, not too sure if this is the right length or not, so what I've done is cut 2. So if the first one's a bit long, I know to cut this one a bit shorter, and if it's a bit too short, I know I can cut it a bit longer. So I've got one to measure off, so I'm going to use one of those, and I've just got a sewing cotton. I've doubled it up and I've just run it through some beeswax just to stick the fibres together. If you want to know about that, we have lots of videos on gold work. Really interesting technique if you're not familiar with it, completely different to anything else you'll do. Okay, let's have a go at one. These are quite tricky, so I'm just going to slide that onto my needle. Pushing it right down to the bottom there. Then I'm going to wrap as I would normally, so over the needle and back. And you can see I've gone around the thread, and I'm keeping that quite loose now. I just want that to curl round like so. Needle goes back down. Now you need 6 hands here, so you need to hold that in place there so it doesn't all pop out. And now what should happen, you can see this, but I'll do another one, is that curls over and goes down the middle of the knot, and that is a French knot, and that worked first time, and I'm quite amazed at that. So let's see if we can do that twice in a row. Just going to put a little holding stitch in that. If you remember earlier I said if you take one out they've all got to come out, and that one's quite good and I don't want to take that one out, so I'll put a little holding stitch and I'll put my knot over the top of that one. Actually I won't, I'll put it down here and put another one over the top of that one, give myself a little bit of room. Very delicate, this pearl, so you can see how I'm handling it. So down to the bottom, so thread away, needle above, round and back on the thread, and then I'm just loosely pulling that pearl around the needle. Needle goes back in. Now I need to sort of hold that down as well, and then that's going to go through the middle. Now that one came out a little bit looser, so the same thing happens with this as happens with the normal French knot, is if you don't pull it tight enough you get loops on it, and that's happened, but you get away with it a little bit with this. So we'll go for one more on this to cut myself another one. That length was pretty good. That's about 1 centimetre I would say. So round and back, pull that round, needle goes in. Just going to hold that down with my finger. You can use a lane tool as well. If I let go, it'll all go wrong. So you can just adjust it back through the middle. If you pull it tighter, that forms. I'm going to stop at 3. I pushed my luck on 3 that work quite well, but just wanted to show you something else that you could use French knots for. It's a really unusual technique. If you like gold work, you might want to have a go at that one. So just another one to throw into the mix there. Okay, so we've had a look at the stitching, quite a lot of detail in some different threads, some different ways that you can do it. So let's have a look at how to put them in context and how you can actually use them in your stitching. So I've got some pieces from my collection I want to show you. I just need to move the cat first so you can see that, so we'll do that and then we'll have a look at those. I know, is it your dinner time? Can I just finish this video please, and then I'll come and get you some dinner? No? Come on matey. Don't like you from the front, come on. Good boy, good boy. So the first piece I want to show you is this little lavender project. I did this on a YouTube video. You can see me stitching this, and just to show you how nicely it does flowers. And this is done in silk ribbon. We've got two colours, so you can mix your colours, done them quite closely together. Change direction, we talked about that earlier, so it looks more organic. And in the fine silk ribbon, I think this is 2mm silk ribbon. I think I might need to check the video to check that one. So make really, really beautiful flowers in the silk ribbon. On a similar theme, this is one of the pieces from my silk shading book I did. So the exercise was about this, but I put some flowers in the basket. So again, some French knots here in some stranded cottons in two colours and the little white bits of French knots as well. So just grouping them together just to make an impression of bunches of flowers. They're not any flower in particular, but really nice and versatile for that. You can group them together. You can just spot the odd one around to give a suggestion of a different kind of flower. So they do make really, really lovely flowers. Maybe not what you would think immediately to do for flowers, but great, and lots of very fine detail as well. This is pretty small, you can see that compared to my hand and how small you can get with that. So this was a piece that I designed for apprentices to work when I was on the Royal School of Needlework apprenticeship. We made a piece for the next year coming up, and we designed a piece and they stitched that. So this was the piece that I designed, and I just wanted to show you this because of this part here and how you can use it for shading. So I haven't filled in the whole leaf with this, I've just sort of dotted them around, and they're closer at the bottom and then they spread out as they go up the veins towards the edge. So it's a really nice shading technique. You don't just have to fill everything in, you can actually use it to create some depth to your piece as well. And if I'd used a darker thread here and a lighter thread, that would have given it even more depth. So another nice technique that you can use. So this is one of my kits I made. This is my ruffled hair, and I just wanted to show you this one because of what's happening here. So we've got different sizes here. So we've talked about that a lot and how to get different sizes of French knots. So wrapping a couple of times or making your thread thicker. So I've done that here, and that gives it more definition as well. It's just like a seed head really. I haven't filled it all in, no need to, but thicker ones around the edge here and finer ones here. It just gives it a little bit more shape and a bit more definition. And again down here I've changed the size as well, and over here, and it's sort of shading it around so it's heavier at the bottom and lighter at the top, and that makes it look more three-dimensional. So quite subtle, but just with one stitch and just changing the thickness you can do that. So this one is a really good piece to show because there's a lot going on here. So you may not see it on this camera. I'll show you above in a second. This is my Mount Mellick white work, and I made it into a cushion, as you can see. So let's have a closer look. So there's lots of French knots going on in this one, so I'll point some out here. So we've got little groups of them here. We've got some up the stems here and some in the stems and the leaf over here. Really solid section of them here, lots of them piled in together to make the centre of the flower. We've got odd little one here at the ends, just from a little bit of fine detail. And again, some more here. I didn't show you this, but this is pistol stitch, which we do have a video on, and this is a French knot on a stick. So you do a French knot, instead of going back down next to where you came out, you do a little bit of a stem and you end up with a French knot on a stick. So again, lots of ways that you can use the knots, and this is all in one piece. And Mount Mellick, you use different thicknesses of thread. You had 4 thicknesses of thread, so you use the thickness of the thread to make the size of the knot to create your texture, which we talked about before. So a really lovely sample of all the different things you can do in one piece. And the last piece that I wanted to show you is a piece called Fine White. Now this was a second year apprentice piece, quite a tricky one to do, lots of technical stuff going on in this one, but I wanted to show you the knots specifically in this. So this is my window here, and I've got a wisteria going up around the outside. So if we look at the window box first, there are some little tiny French knots here. You can see my finger, so you can see how big they are or how small they are. So just some little ones as a suggestion of some flowers in there, in a nice white thread. It's all in white, but you can see the texture against it. So that's the thing with white work, is you use your textures and your threads to give you the definition, because obviously you can't use your colour when it's all white. So just a few here to suggest the leaves, and then we'll just jump up to the top and have a look at what's happening there. So this is wisteria up here. So I've used a couple of different techniques up here. So these are all knots again, but I've used silk ribbon with a white cotton as well, and I've mixed them up to create that texture of the wisteria flower. So the silk is at the top, when it's thicker, and then I come out right to the end in a very fine cotton. You can see here how small they get. So very tiny knots at the end to make this texture and to make these flowers look really three-dimensional. They're really bushy flowers on a wisteria plant when they're out. So just using the two different kinds of materials together that we've looked at already and putting those together to create another texture. So you can do a lot with this stitch, this simple stitch that's not difficult to do, just by using different materials to do your stitches with. So I hope you've enjoyed this video all about French knots, and you've learnt something about the humble French knot that you didn't know already. Do check out all our other videos. We've got loads and loads now, well over 260 to date, so check those out. And if you enjoy them, do give us a thumbs up. It helps more people to see them, and I will see you in the next video.